Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the forest fires, or bushfires as we call them in Australia, but forest fires in general. And this has been brought up, of course, by the recent quite disastrous forest fires in Hawaii. And so, whereas I understand it, somewhere in the region of 100 people lost their lives. Now, the media has the globalist controlled, politicized, ideological media and all the NGOs that are around it have all leapt on the bandwagon and said this is climate change. It's climate change. That's what it is. The more radical ideological fanatics of the climate change thing are saying, well, it's caused by white men. White men did it. The colonialists, white men, Hitler did it. Hitler, Nazis, fascists did it. So the hysteria is the only thing that we can confirm is in existence at the moment. But as for climate change, well, I know some people who are quite senior in the firefighting units and organisation administration in Australia. So I've got sort of an insight that maybe others don't. And I know some of these people on a personal level. We have barbecues, lunches, and dinners and so on with them, and through them we've met some other people and have been privy to the gossip and the carry on and so on. So I just want to talk a bit about this, because when it comes to forest fires, we think it's climate change. Yes, no, that it's just this 100% binary thing, and it's not. If climate change has any effect on forest fires at all, I'd say that it's very minimal, if indeed there's any influence on that. Even if it were the overall, if you're having a particularly dry summer or a dry winter, then you would take precautions in and around that situation. So, or if it's particularly wet, you would maybe relax some things. Particularly wet, a lot of rain in the summer or the winter, then you may relax some things. If it's particularly windy, which dries things out, then you may then be hurt. So there's certainly by my reckoning, there's an inability of the firefighting authorities to respond to actual circumstances. They seem to be always caught absolutely flat-footed. Now that's, I think, because there's the wrong people there. There's the various Western governments have put climate change fanatics into the firefighting units, and so they almost want terrible forest fires because ideologically it gives them a hard on to say, look, we told you climate change. There's nothing we can do. The only thing we can do is put up solar panels, and that'll fix it. So there's certainly a lack of imagination and response, and again, there's as far as I can tell, no response to actual conditions on the ground. It's all ideological. So I'll go through a few things here that that are important to consider when you look at forest fires, and not simply that they exist at all, but their severity. Now, in the case of Hawaii, for example, and other places, the electricity poles, and sometimes they carry telephone wires as well, but these electricity poles that stick out of the ground all around the place, there's a maintenance program there where when they reach a certain age, those wooden poles, you replace them, or you go and check on them and fortify them. Sometimes you can put various fortifying braces on these poles. And now that's quite expensive to do, and there's no votes in it. There's no good saying, well, I'm the mayor of Hicksville, and by the way, we replaced 500 potentially faulty electricity poles during my term as mayor, and so that maintenance program is really going to. So why don't you vote for me? That those sort of things don't get traction with the vote. They should, I think. I think maintenance is important, but they're not something where you can say, and guess what? We're going to protect women against violent offenders. We're supporting lesbians. Yeah, we're going to get Hitler. You know, those sort of things, those emotional things will get you votes. But saying that you replace the electricity wires and the poles, and you had a good maintenance program. So it's expensive to do that, and so when politicians of any persuasion are looking at what is prudent management of assets, they look at that and say, "Oh, gee, that's really expensive to do. There's no votes in it. Why should I do it?" Instead of replacing these poles every I don't know, 25, 50 years or whatever the replacement rate is. Instead of doing it, why don't we just kick the can down the road and we'll replace it in another 10 years or 15 years, and I won't be mayor then, it'll be someone else's problem, or I won't be the governor then. And so these sort of things go on. So there's a reduction in maintenance. Maintenance is expensive, and that's a budget that gets cut. Doesn't mean that some public servant or some maintenance engineer somewhere didn't put in the budget, say we need to replace 100 electricity poles this year because they're degrading. It doesn't mean that wasn't put in, but some politician or someone approving it somewhere go, nah, forget about that. We'll put the money into lesbian painting classes or classes on how evil white people are oppressing brown people. So the money will be diverted along ideological lines. Now, this is, of course, what happens when government becomes more ideological. The money that should be spent reasonably and prudently in something, for example, maintenance, is switched off into other programs, diverted into other programs, such as black lesbian painting classes or whatever, and that maintenance isn't done. So this is very critical. You see this all across the Western world, where ideology has hijacked pretty much all government at local, regional, and federal level. So that's number one, and we get that in Australia too. Poor quality maintenance. The next thing is if the winter is particularly dry, or even if it's an ordinary winter, it doesn't be particularly dry, but unless it's unusually wet, the amount of undergrowth that's in a lot of the forests, certainly in Australia and elsewhere, and the type of grasses that tend to grow in the drier, in drier conditions, if you look at the sort of grasses that prosper in drier conditions, they tend to be the super flammable types of grass and undergrowth, and so that needs to be sort of recognised. And what happens is that the authorities, again, whether it's local or regional government, they engage in what's called backburning, or that's the term used in Australia. So they'll burn out various areas of the undergrowth under controlled conditions with, firefighting equipment strategically placed and located, and so they'll and that undergrowth, that flammable material, is then burned out. So if a fire does occur, it's got much less material to burn with, and so it doesn't. The fire doesn't spread as far or as fast, and it's not as intense should one occur, and it's more easily brought under control as a consequence. So it just doesn't have that extra fuel to burn. But again, that's quite an expensive business. It has to be well planned and coordinated, and there are a number of ideological people in firefighting here. And I'll come back to that in a minute, where instead of practical realists being there, those realists have been replaced with ideological fanatics, and they kind of want a fire. Now there's also various NGOs and green activist groups that say, well, if you do the back burning to prevent the bushfire later, then you're burning out the habitat of local wildlife. Some of them may be endangered. So if you do that back burning, what you're doing is you're attacking these, the wildlife and evil oppression, Nazis, so they go down that path, and this causes some councils and governments and areas to hesitate, because they don't want the bad media of all these very cashed up NGOs saying you're a Nazi because you burned out in there. So they don't want that, assuming that they're not sort of really choreographing themselves with the NGOs to do this, because again, it's quite an expensive business to do all this sort of stuff, and you've got also a risk factor that fire may get out of control, then it'll be blamed on you and not on the weather or climate change or something. So there are politicians who hesitate on it as well. So when fires do start in the summer or the warmer months, they've got a lot more raw material and fuel to burn, and the difference in intensity of the fire could be huge between a fire that has very little fuel and flammable material to burn and a fire that has a lot of flammable material to burn. The intensity is very different. Now, this means that the amount of water you need and the amount of firefighting resources you need in a very intensely burning fire multiply considerably. And a lot of areas simply don't have those type of resources. Now, it's all right if it burns in the middle of nowhere, but if it starts to approach populated areas and things like that, then it's a big difference. Now, also, there's been a big change in the. I remember meeting, this was through business, a firefighting group, or the I don't know what you call it, the executive committee of a state-based or regional-based firefighting group, quite some years ago, and they. At the very apex, they're paid, by the way, the top people, the top coordinators and managers and administrators, they're on the payroll of say, the state government. But everyone else is a volunteer. The people that get in, most of them, they get in the fire trucks and go out into the middle of the blaze. They're nearly all volunteers. They're laying their lives down to protect the rest of us. And that, I think, should always be that selfless commitment to public service should always be recognised and appreciated. But the guys at the apex, and I was meaning, they're all men, all white men, and they, going back probably 30 years or plus years here, they none of them were very bright. Not a lot of high IQs there. But they were very committed to public service. They were very genuinely wanting to do the right thing and, stop people's houses from burning down and save lives and contain the fires. And so they were very committed to that. I just didn't think they were very good at it, but at least they were committed, and their hearts were definitely in the right place. They were, I don't know, there was something about them. They were sort of obsessed over petty details and seemed to miss the bigger picture, as I perceived it, at least. And they could have done with an injection of more brains into the group. But nonetheless, again, very selfless, public service, publicly service-minded, and trying to do as they saw it the right thing. I'm just not sure they went about it very well. But nonetheless, now this has changed. Ideological governments, globalist controlled ideological governments, like everything, they're looking at everything and seeing how can we inject ideology into it. And so I saw a supposed training run that was put on at one of the major, there's a very big park area in Sydney. It's probably 6 or 7 football fields, like 700 to 800 meters long and 150 plus meters wide. And they were having a training run there on firefighting. I wasn't sure about it, but one thing that amazed me is that all the top management, certainly in this group, were all lesbians. Now, again, congratulate them on their dedication to public service, if indeed that's what it was, but it didn't seem that way. They weren't dedicated to public service. They were dedicated to invading an all-male, straight white male institution and showing those Nazis, showing those Nazis how they have to be more diverse and inclusive and so on. So I saw them as ideological social justice warriors. They didn't appear to know a whole lot about firefighting and didn't appear to give a fuck either. They just had their little checklists of, run 10 meters or run 20 meters with hose. Some of those hoses are quite heavy, so it sounds like nothing to do that, but you had to be reasonably fit to do it. But they were giving arbitrary dispensations to women. So if again, you've got to be inclusive. You've got to have black lesbians, and otherwise you're all Nazis if you don't. Now, the idea that you're there to fight fires and that sort of thing, well, not really. This is an institution that we have to turn into an inclusive group, and we have to do ideological. We must do it. We must crush those fucking straight white male Nazis. But aren't you supposed to be fighting fires? No, fuck the fighting fires. We're here to produce ideology. We're here to do inclusive equity, you motherfucker Nazi. So they appeared to be working, if you like, against the idea of fighting fires, but rather pushing ideology. So you've got all these, they weren't black, by the way, but you've got all these lesbians and very butch. I mean, like, we're not talking girly lesbian here. We're talking butch lesbian on, butch dyke, bull dyke on roller skates. And they're there. One of them was actually quite wiry and slim, but nonetheless, they're there. And they in turn have then replaced the next layer of people with girly men. So you've got these simpering little men there who somehow seem to be getting this perverse ideological hard-on over these strong women who are putting the Nazis in their place, and so they're there. So actually, the people that were, and then when the women who were straight, I assume, who had to do some of the stuff, they were given dispensations when they couldn't run the 20 meters with the hose. That doesn't matter. You're part of the equity and inclusion and diversity thing, so we'll give you a free pass. So this meant that the people involved in the firefighting were ideological social justice warriors, not actually firefighters. I got the impression they didn't even care about firefighting, that they were there. They were their purpose. Their only purpose was to inject ideology into the firefighting. Equity ideology, globalist equity ideology. So if anything, they were subtracting. So when I compare the people from 30 years ago, they weren't very bright. But they were, dedicated and trying hard, probably incompetent. The people today are just ideological and also incompetent. Now, I'm sure they've got their, lesbian dance theory degree or their gender studies degree. So technically, you can say, well, look, they're university educated. Wow! I mean, look how far forward we've come in that. But it's not it's an affirmative action education. It's not a real education. So are they any brighter than the people back then? Nope. Maybe they can use words with more syllables in it. But like diversity, all those syllables. The equity of it all. So it was pretty scary looking at that. And now when again, knowing some of the people that are involved here, there was one, as an example. I'll just use one example. Here was a fire that was going, that was controllable. They pulled the trigger too late on getting the resources out onto it, and just administrative incompetence. It was delegated to somebody to, order the helicopters, but that person was the lesbian counselor or something, and she had to go because one of her lesbian clients was threatening to commit suicide. So she just ran off and went off to that and didn't order the helicopters. No one checked if the helicopters had been ordered. This is to water bomb the fire. So in the end, the helicopters didn't turn up. So when it was realised several hours later that the helicopters, in fact, hadn't been ordered, there was no water bombing, then they couldn't do it, and then something was double booked, and then so it was probably a full 24 hours after the trigger had been pulled and already been pulled too late on calling the helicopters out. Now, because of their mismanagement, where the fire resources to put the fire out were allocated to the wrong areas, and again with poorly trained, incompetent, ideological people, and you have to have a black lesbian on the crew, otherwise it's not diverse enough, and et cetera, et cetera. It takes a lot longer to get resources in place and then have those resources, as in the fire truck and the personnel. It takes a lot longer to have those. So you had ridiculous things like fire trucks would turn up somewhere, but they had no water. Or they turn up with the water but had no hose, or they turn up with, the driver or something, but there's no one to operate the hose. And just on it went, just this litany of silly fiasco type errors and mistakes and oversights. So what ended up happening was thousands of acres, the fire got out of control and thousands of acres were burned. Now here's another one with the back burning thing. Back burning wasn't done in this particular area, and it should have been. So the fire authorities quite reasonably thought, well, if the fire jumps the main road, which under the sort of winds it's got, it probably will. If the fire jumps the main road, then it's going to go into an area where there's lots of fuel. There's been no back burning, so lots of undergrowth to burn. It'll be a hugely intensive fire. So we need to back burn that area to try and forestall the fire. So back burn it under control condition. Now the idea is all right. And if you've got a little checklist in front of you, if fire is going to jump highway, do preventative back burns. It's okay, that's on your checklist, but you don't really know what you're doing. You're just an ideological flunky. So now, if you're going to do that, you need, for example, 100 fire trucks in place with water and crews and hoses. I mean, it wouldn't have been 100, but for example, using round numbers, 100. But because all those fire trucks are needed in the fire that you're already trying to control, then you can't do the back burning because you don't have the resources to control it. But that appears further on down the checklist. So you're at just point number 5 that says back burn the area, the high fuel area. So back burn. But point 8, it says make sure you got the resources to cover that. But you're not at that point on the checklist, and you don't know what you're doing. You haven't got a fucking clue. So what you do is you just start the back burning there, but no one else knows. And if you've got a straight white guy there who says, well, hey, we don't have the resources to do that. You fucking Nazi, fucking shut up. This is a diversity and inclusion lesson. You fucking Hitler. And so you can just get rid of him, call him a racist, call him a Nazi, call him Hitler. So you're the lesbian, you're in charge. You're a strong woman. You're a strong woman. What do you have to listen to that fucking straight white male Nazi for? Tell him to fuck off. Good riddance to Hitler. So they start the back burn without any resources to control it. Fuck. And you're looking at this and saying, no, this can't be happening. I mean, no one's this dumb, but they are, and it does. And that's when you've got diversity and inclusion and affirmative action. Now, those guys from 30 odd years ago, they weren't that bright, but they wouldn't have made those sort of mistakes. Now, it doesn't mean that winds can't change direction or there's unforeseen conditions. That still can occur. But this is blatant mismanagement, utter incompetence, and stupid ideological, checklisting and box ticking and so on. So that ended up burning out. The fire just got out of control. So thousands upon thousands of acres were burned out. These precious, the endangered species that were killed. Tens of thousands of endangered species would have been killed, and other species as the fire just raged through this area. And the green groups that are oh no, you can't backburn, you're going to get were very, very quiet about this, because all the people who made the decision were green group lesbians and that sort of thing. So there was no criticism, only because of the ideology of the people that had fucked it all up. But these are the combinations of failure to backburn, failure to organise, failure to do maintenance. The amount of fire trucks they come into and say, okay, let's get the fire truck out there and find it won't start. Well, no one's done the maintenance on them. The fire truck, that actually was out of operation months ago, but no one ordered the parts to go into to fix the fire truck, or the company that did the maintenance, their contract hadn't been renewed to service the fire. All manner of ineptitude going. Now, another one where there was quite a serious fire was going, and we were having dinner with one of the people who was quite senior in the fire thing. He'd retired from it, but he was still buddies with some of the people in the control room. And every time someone got injured or died or burned or something happened, his buddies in the control room would call him to tell him. And so they spent all the time on the phone to their buddies saying, "Hey, Billy Bob died," or "Jimmy Jack got burned," or and well, hold on, why are you doing your job? Tell them to do their fucking job. This fire's raging. They should be on the phone calling their buddies, talking about this. This is bullshit. So these things are going on as well. So you could do a root and branch sort of review of this and say, listen, your job isn't ideological. It isn't call buddies. It isn't some sort of mateship thing, or even though they're volunteers and they need to get on well together, and helps if they know each other, I suppose. But your job is to fight the fucking fires. That is your job. But every government across the Western world has injected ideology into these things, and this is it. So is climate change got anything to do with it? Well, let's suppose it does. Let's suppose climate change has an element. Again, if you've got a situation where you've got a particularly dry winter, you would then take measures to say, okay, these are the real conditions we have to deal with. We therefore must adapt to these conditions to prevent the fires. Then you do that, but that's not happening, and that's a great tragedy, and that's the cause of the forest fires.